All right, let's dive right in. We're going to break down a really fascinating, kind of wild conversation between comedian Kurt Metzger and Joe Rogan. And they're wrestling with this massive question. In a world just flooded with information, who or what is programming your reality? It really gets to the heart of this battle for your fundamental sense of self, your I am.
So the whole thing really kicks off with this pretty provocative idea from Metzger. He's suggesting that our deepest identities, the very core of who we think we are, even our sense of I am, are becoming programmable. And that one thought, right there, it basically sets the stage for everything we're about to explore.
The one concept they just keep coming back to is this, the I am. Now, you can think of it like your core operating system, It's your fundamental sense of reality, your identity. And according to this conversation, that core self, well, it's the new battlefield.
So, to really unpack all this, we're going to look at it in 4 parts. First, we'll ask, who's programming reality? Then, we'll get into the systems of control they call gods, grids, and greed. After that, we'll look at the clash between ancient secrets and nerd shit. And finally, we're going to wrap it all up by asking, what's the actual state of your I am?
Okay, first up, who programs your reality? The creator versus the programmer. Let's start with the biggest question of all, right? Where does our identity even come from in the first place? Is it something innate, something we get from a creator or our family, or is it something installed by an outside programmer?
This entire dialogue really boils down to 2 totally opposing viewpoints. On one side, you have what we're going to call the believer, who sees this grand, almost spiritual conflict for our very soul. And on the other side, you've got the doubter, who sees a much more cynical system that's just driven by plain old human greed.
So, the believer, and this is mostly Metzger's view, argues that our base reality, our starting point, is supposed to come from our family and maybe God. But he claims that modern systems, everything from schools to medicine, are basically designed to hijack that entire process. He literally calls it a boot camp for kids, meant to sever them from their natural identity and make them way easier to program and control.
But then you get the counter-argument. Rogan really pushes back on this grand sweeping theory, suggesting the real motive might be a lot simpler. When Metzger brings up something like vaccine mandates as a tool for programming, Rogan's response is blunt. Nah, it's just about money. And that's the core of the doubter's view. It's not that there isn't a system of control. Of course there is. But it's not some huge metaphysical war for your soul. It's a functional system, kind of like the old Prussian education model, that was designed for a really practical purpose, to create obedient workers and to consolidate wealth. It's about greed, not God.
Okay, next up, gods, grids, and greed, the beast versus the pyramid scheme. So, how do these competing ideas actually play out in the structures of power we see every day? Is the system we're living in some divine, all-seeing machine? Or is it just a messy human pyramid scheme?
From the believer's perspective, the endgame here is almost theological. The idea is that the elites are using technology to achieve a kind of godlike status. You know how God is described as being able to see everyone all the time? Well, they want to build a technological system that lets them do the exact same thing, all while they stay completely invisible.
And Metzger, he gives this whole concept a name, the beast system. He's talking about a total surveillance grid that's designed to replace the divine with the digital. He sees it as just the modern version of an ancient power struggle. The priest, who holds the secret knowledge, versus the king, who actually wields the power.
And that really is the core tension, isn't it? Is this some metaphysical battle for divine power, or is it all just a giant pyramid scheme?
The doubter's view just completely deflates that grand narrative. It asks, are the people in charge really these masterminds executing some divine plan? Or are they just a bunch of scumbags and idiots, as the dialogue puts it, who are running a system based on good old-fashioned blackmail and financial games? It's less about a perfect machine and way more about flawed, corrupt people.
Now for our third section, ancient secrets versus nerd shit, or mystery versus materialism. So, how can 2 people look at the exact same world and see such completely different things? Well, it all comes down to a fundamental clash over the nature of truth itself. This quote from Metzger just perfectly captures the believer's frustration. He's challenging the very foundation of the modern expert class, right? He's suggesting that their scientific materialist worldview isn't some objective search for truth, but a paid-for narrative that very conveniently leaves out anything mystical or mysterious.
And this, right here, illustrates that divide perfectly.
The believer is saying the elites are operating on this level of hidden mystical knowledge. He brings up stuff like stories of the Anunnaki, while they feed the rest of us a sterilized, purely materialist worldview. The doubter, meanwhile, is just looking for logical, observable explanations for how the world works.
The debate they have over gold is the perfect case study. The believer, citing theorists like Zecharia Sitchin, points to this mystical origin. Ancient aliens needed gold to fix their atmosphere. But the doubter offers a totally materialist explanation. Gold is just a unique metal that's super easy to work with and can be spread incredibly thin, which makes it really useful. See? Two completely different realities from the same fact.
So after all this conflict over reality and power and truth, what's the final diagnosis? Let's talk about the state of your IAM. Are we programmed, or are we just navigating a whole lot of noise?
The two sides offer starkly different conclusions. The believer argues that our IAM is being actively violated, or molested, as Metzger puts it, to create a brand new, compliant subconsciousness. But the doubter sees the IAM as more resilient than that. It's not totally hijacked, but it is being forced to navigate an unbelievably confusing landscape of propaganda and deliberate chaos.
And here's the really crucial point. Despite their wildly different explanations for why it's happening, both the believer and the doubter land on a shared conclusion. They both see evidence of what a declassified OSS manual calls simple sabotage. These are intentional actions designed to confuse, to demoralize, and to clog up the gears of our minds and our society.
Which leaves us with the critical question we have to ask ourselves. As you look at the world and all the information that's flooding your own mind, which one feels more true to you? Is your fundamental sense of self, your I am, being actively rewritten by some outside force? Or are you still at the controls, just trying your best to steer through an overwhelming storm of noise? The answer to that, well, it might just define everything.